Welcome to At Home with Music. I'm Leon Olguin. We're going to take a look at a very well-known early Beatles song, P.S. I Love You. It was written primarily by Paul McCartney around the time of the Beatles' 1962 trip to Hamburg. It was first released as the B-side to their debut single, Love Me Do, and it appeared later on the Please, Please Me album. The sentimental lyrics of this song made it very popular with the Beatles' female fans, and it soon became a fixture of their live shows. Let's take a closer look at this song because it has some unusual things about it, especially the chord progression. We're going to take a closer look at the tune, at the chord progression, and then let's learn how to play it. So let's switch to the overhead camera. Let's begin by looking at the melody. And you'll notice right away that even though we are in the key of D, you can see two sharps there in the key signature, the first note of the melody is B. So it's a pretty good chance that the first chord is not going to be D. It's an interesting way to start. And what we're actually starting with here is actually some of the material that turns up in the bridge. We're not starting right away with a chorus. We're not starting right away with the verse. We're actually starting here in what is likely the bridge. And so, now if you're very familiar with this song, you may even be able to pick out this tune by ear. But we're kind of reading it off the lead sheet. One thing to remember about lead sheets is that they simplify the rhythm sometimes, and if you play it exactly as it's written, it's going to sound a little bit stiff. So this may sound a little bit stiff by itself. So we have this phrase, and then it repeats with a slight variation, and then another. And then we have the resolution. We're finally going to end up on D. So that kind of serves as the introduction of the song. So rather than it being an instrumental introduction, we've got an instrumental and vocal introduction. Now we play the verse. And so we have a 10-measure verse, which is a little unusual. A lot of times a verse will be 8 bars long. But in this case, we have a 10-measure verse. Notice how this melody stands by itself. In fact, if you are familiar with the Beatles catalog and somebody begins to play this, you'll already know that we are playing P.S. I Love You. And then here is what we might call the hook. Now you see that when we get to the I Love You, we end up on D. But we're going to find out when we get to the chords that we're going to be doing something very unusual. And this next phrase, where he sings you, that confirms that we've done something interesting with the chords there. Instead of, which is what a normal song would do, this one has this rather exotic sound in the melody. Then it repeats again. We're now on verse 2. So it's obviously exactly like verse 1. Now we get to the bridge. And you can see those little notes there. Those are the things that they sing the next time through. Now we're under Remember That I'll Always Be in Love with You. So you have a first ending. It goes back to the other mirror repeat sign, if you like. And now we're going to be singing this set of lyrics that we've already sung in verse 1. Now it's verse 3. and so on. And now we're going to go straight over to the coda. And what we have here is what we call the 3 times and out ending. So you, and then it repeats, you, and then the final declaration, I love you. That's the melody. Very memorable, very singable. But now let's take a look at the chords. Now, if you look at this particular lead sheet, which I purchased from a website called MuseScore. Is it MuseScore? Well, anyway, I'll put a link to that particular website where you can purchase this lead sheet. It's only a few bucks. The first chord they give you is E minor 7. But if you listen to the recording, I think the chord really is G. And so you can see how the melody resolves down to an A. Now the A, of course, is part of the D major chord, and you can see that they've already given you the D major chord. But notice the chord in between. I'm going to play G there. So if you happen to purchase the lead sheet, you can kind of cross out E minor 7 and write G. But instead of going from G, which is the 4 chord in the key of D, instead of going from 4 to 5 and then 1, it would sound like this. Perfectly acceptable. But look at what is there. It's C sharp 7. This is an early instance now of the Beatles using unusual chords, at least unusual for the time. And it grabs your attention, doesn't it? So, how did we arrive at this chord? This would be the 4. And if you were to use the Roman numeral for this C sharp 7 chord, you would actually have to write it as the 7, 7, sharp 5, sharp 3. Wow, how do we get there? Well, you remember when you play all the chords that are contained within the D major scale, or, you've got the D major scale, we build a 3-note triad on each note of the scale. You end up with D major, E minor, F sharp minor, G, A, B minor, and then C sharp diminished. We'll put it down here. Sometimes this diminished chord can be used as a substitute for the 5 because it actually contains 2 notes from the 5 chord and then what is actually the 7th of an A7 chord. So it could sound like this. But McCartney alters the chord now by, first of all, using C sharp as the root and then raising the 3rd. So that's where you get the sharp 3 from. And then also raising the 5th and adding the 7th. So that's how we get our 7, 7, sharp 5, sharp 3. And it really does grab your attention. And then it repeats. And we have just D over A. So you'll notice how I'm playing them. We have G, and then you kind of jump down here. And this leads your fingers very naturally to play the D chord. So you have to do a little bit of a jump. And then here, you can play D over A, and this is basically D major chord in second inversion, A7, and back to D. Now, starting the verse, when the chord doesn't change, when you don't see a new chord written, it's the same chord again, D. Now here we do have E minor 7. Now what this is known as, this particular progression, we call this a chord stream. It's where you have the chords moving in parallel motion, as it were. The root moves, going from D to E minor or E minor 7, and then back to D. Now this actually breaks a rule of music theory where you don't want to use parallel fifths or parallel octaves. However, it works. So if you're playing something like this, that's a chord progression, but you can also call that a chord stream because you're playing successive chords. You know, there's a famous Bill Withers song. So that's a chord progression, but it's also a chord stream. Very cool. So anyway, we go from D to E minor 7. And then notice the melody stays on B for just a second there and then resolves to A. And this is what's known in the melodic terms as an appoggiatura. An appoggiatura is also known as a leaning note. So normally you have a note that's one step above the main note. The main note here is A, lines up with the D major chord. The appoggiatura makes you land on the note above that A, and so you have a slight dissonance. It's not super ugly, but it feels like it needs to resolve. There's a little bit of tension there. And so it's resolved by a step onto the main note, on what is actually a weak beat. You're in 4/4 time here, and so beat 1 is obviously a strong beat. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. 2 is a weaker beat, and so the appoggiatura is this B, which quickly resolves to A. And you'll notice the appoggiatura is used a lot in good melodies that are very interesting to sound. He could have played something like this. And that technically is correct, but just doesn't sound as interesting, does it? This is really catches your ear. And then notice here, we go from the D to an A7, and then another appoggiatura. There's the note that's a step above the main note, which is D. And so we have a brief dissonance in the harmony, and then it's resolved by step onto the main note on the following weak beat. And then another one here. And now we have this interesting chord. This was something very unique, very innovative for the time. He could have done the plagial cadence, but instead we get this very exotic sounding thing. The bass is moving up half a step, and in reality this chord, you could say, is being borrowed from the parallel minor. What's the parallel minor of D major? D minor. In D natural minor, you end up with this as we could call this the flat 6 chord in the key of D, flat major 6, but it's also borrowed from D minor, and as is this C7. And once again, we have a chord stream. Okay, and now we're playing verse 1. There's our appoggiaturas, another appoggiatura here. There's that chord really catches your ear, doesn't it? That B flat. Now when we get to the bridge, the chords become simpler. Just going back and forth from 1 and 4. And then there's our 5/7. All right. How can we play this as a solo piece? We can do it very simply by playing chords on beats 1 and 3. And I'll start very slowly here. Now we're on the verse. You can always add this. You'll notice that it doesn't say G over D, but I'm playing it in second inversion to make it easier to go back and forth. Okay, and we're going back to I'll Be Coming Home. Now we're coming up to the coda. And then 3 times and out. Here's the big finish. All right. Now, when you listen to the recording, you'll notice it's really played like a cha-cha. If you play the rhythm like a cha-cha. Cha-cha-cha. Whoops. I'm going kind of too fast there. I remember playing a lot of cha-chas when I was in a society band. We never used this song, though, but it really could be played like a cha-cha. If you don't know what a cha-cha is, you need to study a little bit about the different types of ballroom dances. That would be an interesting subject for another video. I'm always amazed that a song like this could be written by a fellow who's just barely out of his teens. I was nearly 30 before I ever wrote a halfway decent song. You're never going to hear any of the songs that I wrote in my teens and early 20s. Because they're pretty terrible. But anyway, there you go. P.S. I Love You. I hope you have some fun playing around with this. If you have any questions, any comments, please be sure to let me know in the comments section. If you'd like to support my work, you can go to my Patreon page, and the link will be in the description. So thank you for playing along, and I look forward to showing you how to play some other great songs.